One small point. I've read the report which you have prepared, and it's very good, apart from the opening sentence, which is inaccurate. The opening sentence says, until September 11, 2001, Afghanistan had not been on the foreign policy agendas of the countries of the world. This is not true. And it's a sign of the times in which we live that we forget history so quickly. Because Afghanistan was put on the agendas of the world in 1979 December when the Soviet troops entered and occupied that country. It became an absolutely dominant factor in the Cold War. And American politicians have now written openly they couldn't believe their luck that the Russians had entered this Muslim country, and they said we are now going to teach them a lesson to revenge what they did in Vietnam. And they did it. And the Russians withdrew 10 years later. And for those 10 years, from 1979 to 1989, if you go back and look at what the press was writing in the United States and Western Europe, all the people they are fighting now, they were describing as freedom fighters, valiant people. And some of that material can be used against them, because they were saying how immoral it is to occupy a country like Afghanistan. No, many of the arguments here against the US occupation were used by the mainstream against the Soviet occupation. So it's important to remember these things and not think of this as something immediate. It's a war now which has been going on in that country for nearly 30 years. A country which has been occupied by first Russia, then Civil War, then America. And you can imagine the effect this war has on the politics and psychology of a nation and on the personal psychologies of citizens who live there. We don't have to go into detail on what wars do to countries. I mean, we're talking in Spain, which saw one of the most brutal civil wars of the 20th century in European history. And the aftermath of that, from which, in my opinion, Spain still has not completely recovered. The rest, I think it's important on Afghanistan, to understand that the Taliban, the original Taliban, what does the word mean? The word means students. Talib, students. That the original Taliban was created by Pakistani military intelligence from the refugee layers inside Pakistan, with the support of the West and with the backing of the United States, to go and take Kabul and end the civil war between the different warring factions after the Soviet troops withdrew. Now, to be fair, Yevgeny Primakov, Soviet foreign minister, said to the Pakistanis at a very high level, we are going to leave. No question, we are leaving. He was not then foreign minister, he was in charge of relations with Asia for the Politburo. But we would suggest to you not to encourage people who want to come into Afghanistan and wipe out the old regime. They will do it very brutally and you will have a civil war. Better to ask your people to work with the people we are leaving behind and create some new structure. And there was a discussion within the Pakistani foreign policy establishment on this. And they had to make a call to Washington, and Washington said reject this proposal, go. So they did it, because they normally do what they're asked to do. That too was a tragedy. And then we saw the brutality with which other people were dealt with when the Taliban finally arrived in Kabul. However, so this was, I say this to you because it's important to understand the present. that the Taliban was created by Pakistani military and Pakistani military. And they took Kabul. And within the Pakistani military establishment, they saw that as a big crime, a big victory which gave the Pakistani regime strategic space. Nonsense, but that's what they think. And they saw that. And then after 9/11, they were asked to unravel the only victory they had ever won in their entire existence and give it up. And they did. But the general sent to talk to the Taliban after 9/11 said to them, don't fight. It's crazy, you will be destroyed. American military power cannot be resisted. And the majority of them accepted this advice and left, went to their villages, came into Pakistan, shaved their beards, and they were told, wait, just wait, be patient. The small faction led by Mullah Omar did not do that, but they were marginalized. And then as the occupation began to grow, and the time it spent there, and as it became clear to the people of Afghanistan that nothing was being done for them, but only for a tiny corrupt elite imported by the United States, the insurgency grew and grew and grew. This is accepted now by most Americans, serious American analysts, that we made mistakes for the first 4 years. Well, these mistakes have now cost them Afghanistan. In my opinion, there was, even though I hate wars and occupation and all this business, nonetheless, if we are being completely objective, we can say that for the first 8 months after the entry of American troops, there was a small window of opportunity. Many Afghans were fed up with the Taliban-style government. There was a sense of relief, but just for a few months. And if in that period the West had poured in money to build schools, hospitals, shelter, it only costs $5,000 to $6,000 to build a cheap house which can house a family of 5 to 6 people. $5,000 to $6,000. They could have built hundreds of thousands of these houses and given them to people. Brought in medicines, trained people. They didn't do any of that. Because we are now living in neoliberal time. And state interventions to create social infrastructures are forbidden in Europe. So how can you do it in Afghanistan? Many people in Europe and America would say, hey, if the state can do this in Afghanistan, why not in our own country?